What do modern travelers have in common with the first conquerors of Everest? The desire to save on unnecessary expenses. 70 years ago, climbers relied on oxygen tanks and radio communications. But in 2017, young tourists will decide to save money on a local guide to the most inaccessible and dangerous point in the Himalayas. Technology has undergone significant changes, but human nature has remained largely unchanged. Two students from Taiwan flew to Kathmandu with dreams of a real adventure. When the travel agency manager insisted on hiring a local guide for $40 a day, Liang and Liu saw only one thing: an attempt to foist an unnecessary tourist service on them. What began as a desire to save money ultimately became a story that will rewrite medical textbooks. 21-year-old Liang Shengyue spent his childhood in the mountains of Taiwan, where he learned to read the weather by observing the movement of clouds and find his way even in thick fog. A freshman at National Donghua University, he worked as a courier every evening, putting his earnings into a glass jar labeled "Real Adventure." His friends considered him an experienced climber, even though the most serious climb of his life had not exceeded 10,000 feet. Liu Chenchen was 2 years younger, but she had enough energy for 3 people. The 19-year-old student from Miaoli City saved money not for fashionable clothes, but for tickets to distant countries. Her friends remembered her as a cheerful child who constantly dreamed of new places on the map. Liu had no mountain experience at all, but she had that incredible confidence of youth that turns any dream into a feasible plan. In the winter of 2017, they made a decision that would determine their entire future. A month on bicycles along the roads of India, then the border with Nepal, and on foot to the most remote corners of the Himalayas. To a place where there are no crowds of tourists with selfie sticks, where every turn of the trail reveals the pristine beauty of the world. Their backpacks contained everything they needed for a 2-week self-sufficient hike. A modern GPS navigator that knew the coordinates of every mountain peak. Detailed topographic maps of the region. A tent designed for extreme weather conditions. A supply of instant noodles, cookies, and canned food. Enough money in their wallets to last another month of traveling in Asia, if they spent wisely. The first cracks in the perfect plan appeared at the Kathmandu airport. The baggage department lost Liu's backpack, which contained spare clothes. Instead of a joyful start to the adventure, we had to spend 3 hours at the police station filling out paperwork for the loss. It was a small thing that ruined the mood and started a chain of mutual accusations. Who forgot to check the luggage tags? Why didn't we insure our belongings? Why did we take so much extra stuff in the first place? The arguments continued over the next few days, about the route, about the weight distribution in the backpacks, and about where to buy food. Those little things that become huge problems when people are tired and nervous in a foreign country. On the 8th March, the day before setting off for the mountains, Liu posted a short message on Facebook that her friends would reread for months. "I regret being here." 5 words, no explanation, no comment. A premonition of trouble or just irritation with luggage problems? No one will ever know. But the main decision that determined their fate was made at the travel agency's office. A manager named Ram spent a considerable amount of time explaining the route's features to Ganesh Himal. This region was radically different from the popular trekking trails. There were no signs in English, no tea houses every few miles, and no mobile phone coverage. The trails often disappeared under the snow, the weather changed in minutes, and even experienced travelers could get lost. Ram strongly recommended hiring a local guide. Someone who knew every turn of the trail could read the signs of bad weather and find the way even in complete darkness. The cost of the service was $40 per day, including his food and equipment. Liang and Liu exchanged glances and refused. $40 a day meant an extra week of travel somewhere in Thailand or Laos. On 9th of March, they left the last village with heavy backpacks on their shoulders and complete confidence that GPS and common sense would replace any guide. Ganesh Himal attracted them precisely because of its pristine nature. Unlike Annapurna, where hundreds of tourists walk the main trail every day, Here you can walk for a whole day and not meet a single person. There are no signs in English, no rescue stations with radios, and no mobile phone reception above 8,200 feet. Locals warned that even those born in a neighboring village could easily get lost in these mountains. For Lian and Liu, it was precisely this choice that separates valid travelers from ordinary tourists. The opportunity to walk where every turn of the trail reveals pristine beauty, where there are no crowds with selfie sticks and guides with megaphones. The first 3 days fully lived up to their expectations. The trail led through the villages of the Tamang and Gurung peoples, where children ran out of their houses to stare at the rare foreigners. Women in traditional skirts offered hot tea for a nominal fee. Men pointed the way with gestures when the language barrier could not be overcome with words. In the evenings, they set up camp by mountain streams, cooked noodles on a portable burner, and gazed at the starry sky, which was never so bright in the city. The GPS reliably tracked their progress along the route. It was a 2-day leisurely climb to the planned pass. On the morning of 9th of March, everything seemed to be under control. The first clouds appeared around noon, gray wisps clinging to the mountain peaks. This was normal at an altitude of 9,200 feet in March. Liang checked the weather forecast he had saved in the last village with internet access. Light cloud cover. No precipitation for the next 3 days. The GPS showed 4 miles to the next landmark on the map. By 4 p.m., the clouds had thickened into a solid gray mass above their heads. The temperature dropped from 46.4 degrees to 35.6 degrees in an hour. The wind picked up and began to pierce through their jackets. The first large snowflakes fell around 6 p.m. as they set up their tent on a relatively flat spot under a group of low-growing junipers. By midnight, the snow had turned into a full-blown storm. The tent sagged under the weight of the precipitation, and the wind tore at the guy lines, threatening to rip the entire structure apart. Liang went outside several times to clear the snow from the tent and reattach the ropes. In the morning, they were greeted by a white desert. The snow cover was 28 inches thick. For March, this amount of snow was abnormal for this area. All landmarks had disappeared. The rocks they had used to determine their direction yesterday had turned into white mounds. The trail, clearly visible the day before, had dissolved under a smooth blanket of snow. The GPS still knew their exact coordinates with an accuracy of 10 feet, but the screen showed only a green dot on a white map background. Where to go from this point, if every step could fall into a hidden crevasse or break off a cliff camouflaged by snow? By noon on 10th March, Liang made the decision that seemed the only reasonable one in their situation: descend toward the sound of water. The logic was simple and straightforward. Mountain rivers flow into valleys, valleys lead to villages, and villages mean salvation. This logic works in most mountainous regions of the world, but not in the Himalayas, where rivers do not flow to people, but fall into inaccessible abysses, turning into waterfalls. They heard the roar of water on the morning of 11th March. The Narchit River, hidden under a thick layer of snow, flowed somewhere below the slope. The sound was powerful and encouraging. A large river meant a wide valley, which meant a better chance of meeting people, or at least finding a trail. The descent down the snow-covered slope took 4 hours. Every 330 feet, Liang stopped, listened to the sound of the water, and adjusted his direction. The snow gave way under his feet, forcing him to grab onto the branches of the bushes. Liu followed closely in his footsteps, trying not to stray from the route. At 11:40 a.m., the fog suddenly cleared, and they saw what destroyed all their hopes. The river ended in a 50-foot waterfall. The stream of water crashed against the rocks below with a deafening roar, raising clouds of spray that immediately froze on the walls of the gorge. To the right and left were sheer cliffs, covered with a crust of ice from the constant fog. An hour of searching for an alternative route yielded no results. There were no bypass trails. The only way to continue down was to climb down the wet rocks on the side of the waterfall, holding onto rock ledges and plant roots growing in the crevices. Lian was the first to begin the descent. Carefully checking each foothold, he covered the first 16 feet on the rocks, which were slippery from the spray. Liu followed him, trying to repeat his movements exactly and place her feet in the same spots. At the 20-foot mark, everything went wrong. The rock under Liang's left foot, worn down by constant spray, couldn't withstand the extra weight. He slipped and instinctively tried to grab the nearest support. That support turned out to be Liu's outstretched hand. For a second, they hung together over the abyss. Then both fell. A 330-foot fall through rock ledges and loose scree. Impacts against rocks. The crack of breaking bones. Flashes of unbearable pain and darkness. Their backpacks, which by some miracle had not come off, hit their backs with every impact against the rocks. When the fall finally stopped, they were lying on a narrow stone ledge in the middle of the sheer wall of the gorge. A natural shelf 10 feet wide, jutting out from the rock like a balcony without a railing. Above them stretched 230 feet of nearly vertical wall, wet from the constant spray of the waterfall. Below, the abyss gaped another 100 feet to the bottom of the gorge, where a river foamed between sharp rocks. Leon regained consciousness first. His head split with pain. His left shoulder burned like fire. It was difficult to tell if it was dislocated or broken. Liu lay motionless beside him, blood oozing from a deep wound on her forehead. But she was breathing evenly, and that was the main thing. Their backpacks lay at the very edge of the ledge, another 1.5 feet, and they would have fallen into the abyss along with their tent, food, and all the other equipment necessary for survival. They had survived a fall from a height of 330 feet, but they found themselves in a stone prison from which it was impossible to escape on their own, and the constant roar of the waterfall drowned out any cries for help. The stone ledge turned out to be slightly larger than initially estimated, almost 13 feet long and about 8 feet wide. Miraculously, their backpacks and all their equipment survived. They had enough food to last 12-14 days if they used it sparingly. For 2 young bodies, this meant a real chance of waiting for rescue. Liang drew up a detailed survival plan. In the morning and evening, they would blow whistles as loudly as possible. During the day, they would wave Liu's bright red jacket if a helicopter or plane appeared. They would strictly ration their food, but not starve themselves. They would conserve their strength and wait for help to arrive. The first few days passed almost calmly. The pain from the bruises he had sustained in the fall gradually subsided. Liu's arm turned out not to be broken, but only severely sprained at the shoulder joint. They even joked sometimes about what stories they would tell their friends back home. The worst thing was the constant roar of the waterfall and the humidity. Their clothes never dried, their sleeping bags got damp, and the cold penetrated to their bones even during the day. They believed they would be rescued. Their friends were waiting for them in the village of Langtang. Their families in Taiwan would worry if they didn't hear from them. They just had to wait. Pause. On 15th of March, the phone at the Liang family's home in Taiwan rang at 4 a.m. It was a call from friends in Nepal. The young couple had not arrived in the village of Langtang on the appointed date. Yes, delays due to bad weather do happen in the mountains, but it had already been 6 days since the last contact. Liang's father did not hesitate for a second. An hour later, he was in contact with the Taiwanese representative office in Kathmandu. 2 hours later, an official request for help was sent to the Nepalese tourist police. By noon on 16th March, the search operation was officially announced. Helicopters appeared in the sky above Ganesh Himal. They methodically combed the valleys, circled over the passes, and hovered over any suspicious spots on the snow. On the ground, rescue teams with dogs searched all known routes in the area where the couple's last known location was. On their ledge, Liang and Liu heard helicopters 3 times in a week. Each time the machines flew high, not descending to the gorge. The sound of the engines echoed off the canyon walls, creating an acoustic illusion. It was impossible to determine precisely where the noise originated. They waved a red jacket, shouted until they were hoarse, and blew whistles. However, the helicopters disappeared behind the mountain ridges, unnoticed by their signals. In Taiwan, Liang's father hired a private investigator to coordinate the search. Liu's mother flew to Kathmandu on the first available flight. The families did not sleep, constantly updating the news and consulting with astrologers. In critical situations, people grasp at any straw, even if the rational part of their consciousness does not believe in fortune-telling. In Nepal, rescuers used more practical methods. They observed the flights of vultures, which could indicate areas requiring attention. They interviewed residents of remote villages. They checked all hospitals and police stations within a 60-mile radius. By the end of the second week, Liang and Liu had run out of food. All they had left were cookie crumbs, a small supply of salt for cooking, and tea bags. But that wasn't what worried them the most. What worried them was that they could no longer hear the sound of helicopters coming from over the mountains, and that could only mean one thing: they had stopped looking for them. They shared the last crumbs of cookies on 23rd March. Liang broke off pieces with mathematical precision, giving Liu a little more. She tried to object, but he was adamant. He had more muscle mass, which meant more energy reserves in his body. Now all they had left was salt and the ability to melt snow for water. Liang remembered his school biology lessons. Salt helps the body retain fluid in cells and maintains electrolyte balance. He began adding pinches of salt to each mug of melted water, creating a kind of saline solution. On 29th of March, a message arrived from Kathmandu that sent a chill through all their relatives. The official search operation was suspended due to adverse weather conditions and a lack of new leads. 3 weeks of intensive searching had yielded no results. The probability of finding the couple alive was close to zero. In Taiwan, families began to receive condolences from friends and colleagues. Some were already discussing the details of future memorial services. Officially, Liang Shengyue and Liu Chenchun were considered dead in the mountains. Liang began to count the days by scratching lines on the wall of the tent with a stone. 21 days in a stone prison. Liu spent more and more time in her sleeping bag, conserving her energy. Hunger ceased to be an acute pain and became a constant companion. By the beginning of the 4th week, the changes in their bodies had become visually noticeable. Liang had lost so much weight that his jeans were held up only by his belt, which was tightened to the limit. His cheekbones became more pronounced, and his eyes sank into deep shadows. But Liu was in much worse shape. Her body, smaller in size and with less fat reserves, gave up faster. By the end of March, she began to fall asleep in the middle of conversations. Her movements became slow, and her speech turned into a whisper. By early April, Liang noticed that he had started talking to himself. Not out loud, but mentally and constantly. He planned non-existent escape routes, recalled the taste of dishes he had eaten a month ago, and mentally wrote letters to his parents that he would never send. Slowly, but surely, their bodies were entering a state of dying. By mid-April, it was clear that Liu was losing the battle for her life. Her skin had taken on a waxy, yellowish tint. When she tried to stand up, her legs buckled under her own weight. She now spoke only in whispers. Liang did everything in his power. Every hour he melted snow and brought a mug to her lips. He massaged her arms and legs, trying to maintain blood circulation in her limbs. He told her about his plans for the future, how they would return home, finish university, get married, and remember this ordeal as a terrible but overcome nightmare. On 21st April, Liu stopped drinking water. On 22nd April, she stopped responding to questions. On 23rd April, at dawn, her breathing became irregular. There were long pauses between breaths, followed by short series of rapid, shallow movements of her chest. Liang stayed awake all night, counting her breaths. Liu Chenchun died at dawn on 24th April, when the first rays of sunlight touched the eastern wall of the gorge high above their heads. Death came quietly, in the interval between one breath and the next, which never came. Liang felt it before he understood it with his mind. The hand he had been holding all night grew colder. Her chest stopped rising and falling in its usual rhythm. Silence filled the cramped space of the tent. He lay next to her for another 2 hours, unable to believe what had happened. Then he gently closed her eyes and kissed her forehead. Her skin was cold, like mountain rock in the morning air. The first few hours passed in a state of complete numbness. He did not cry. His dehydrated body could not produce tears. He just lay there and stared at the gray ceiling of the tent, trying to comprehend the new reality of his existence. He was alone on a rocky ledge in the middle of a sheer wall, 8,500 feet above sea level, without food, without contact with the outside world, without hope of rescue. Next to him lay the body of the girl he loved more than life itself. He didn't sleep at all on his first night alone. He lay there listening to the roar of the waterfall, which now seemed not just background noise, but the voice of death itself, coming after him. By morning, he had made the only decision that still made sense. He would not give up. Not now, when she could no longer fight for both of them. The first morning without Liu began with a hallucination. Liang woke up to the sound of her voice calling his name, as she did every morning. He turned to her with a half-asleep smile and saw the motionless sleeping bag on the opposite wall of the ledge. Reality crashed into his consciousness like a rockfall. His brain, exhausted by 44 days of starvation, began to malfunction seriously. What doctors call starvation hallucinations are the result of a critical drop in blood glucose levels. Auditory illusions, false visions, and distorted perception of reality. But for Lian, it was the return of Liu. He spoke with her all day on 25 April, sharing his plans for the future. Sometimes it seemed to him that she was responding directly to his consciousness. By evening, his right leg began to hurt. When he took off his shoe, he saw a swollen toe with a dark spot under the nail. By the morning of 26 April, his leg had swollen up to his shin. Maggots appeared between his toes. His body was beginning to decompose while he was still alive. His weakened body could not expend energy to fight infections. Lice multiplied in his hair. Liang tried to crush them with his fingernails, but there were too many parasites. In the afternoon of 26th April, he heard the sound of helicopter blades. At first, he thought it was a hallucination. Over the past few days, he had heard many sounds that weren't there. The voices of rescuers, the barking of dogs, even music. But the noise grew louder and more real. Liang crawled out of the tent on all fours, waving Liu's red jacket and shouting in a hoarse whisper. He hopped on one leg because the other was almost useless. The helicopter flew over the gorge and disappeared behind the ridge. The night of April 26-27 was the hardest. Liang lay delirious, shivering from the cold and fever simultaneously. He felt life leaving his body drop by drop. He imagined how he would die here, how his parents would bury empty coffins. But in the darkest hour before dawn, Liu's voice rang out in his mind. It was not a hallucination. It was the memory of her words in difficult moments. Don't give up. Never give up. By the morning of 27 April, he had made his final decision. He would live. Not for himself, for her. On the morning of 26th April, the Asian trekking rescue team, led by Madhav Basnet, took to the air for what would be their last time. It was a gesture of desperation, not real hope. After 7 weeks of searching, no one seriously believed that the Taiwanese couple could be found alive. There was a cruel rule in the mountains. A person could survive without food for a maximum of 40 days. After that, only bodies are searched for to return to their families. But the parents did not give up. Lian's father transferred additional money from Taiwan. He paid for another flight over the areas where his son and his girlfriend might be found. Local resident Dawa Tamang reported seeing a red spot in the Narket River area, possibly a tent or bright clothing. The helicopter entered the gorge from the north, following the river's bends. The pilot descended as low as the stone walls allowed, while Basnet scanned the slopes through powerful binoculars. There were many waterfalls in the area, but most of them plunged into inaccessible crevices. At 11:45 a.m., one of the crew members shouted the words that no one believed anymore. Someone's moving over there. On a narrow ledge in the middle of a sheer wall, a person was waving something red. The figure resembled a skeleton covered with skin, but it was clearly alive. A tent and some belongings were visible nearby. Basnet later told reporters that his initial reaction was not one of excitement, but shock. In our minds, we had already given up hope of finding them alive. So when we saw the guy, we were scared for a second. The helicopter hovered over the gorge, but landing on the ledge was physically impossible. Two rescuers, Basnet and his assistant, descended on long ropes, equipped with climbing gear. Baskets and additional equipment drifted on cables below the machine. The man on the ledge greeted them with the only word he knew in Nepali. Namaste. His voice was hoarse, barely audible, but it sounded grateful. What the rescuers saw shocked even the experienced mountain workers. Liang Shengyue weighed approximately 90 pounds and stood at about 67 inches tall. His ribs protruded through his skin, and his cheeks were so sunken that his face resembled a skull. His eyes seemed enormous on his emaciated face. His right leg was swollen and clearly infected. His hair was infested with parasites, but the most difficult sight awaited the rescuers on the opposite wall of the ledge. There lay a sleeping bag with the body of a girl inside. "She died 3 days ago," Liang said in broken English. His voice sounded calm, as if he were apologizing for being late for a meeting. After 47 days in a stone prison, having lost half his weight and the girl he loved, the man spoke as if he were simply reporting a minor inconvenience. A helicopter took Liang to Grande International Hospital in Kathmandu an hour after his rescue. The doctors expected to see a dying man in critical condition. What they saw contradicted all the textbooks on the physiology of starvation. Dr. Chakrarej Pandey, the hospital's chief physician, later told reporters he was extremely emaciated but fully conscious. He could answer questions and remember events. It's just amazing. Liang had lost 66 pounds, almost half of his original 156. His muscle mass had atrophied so much that his skin hung in folds on his arms and legs. His blood sugar was critically low, his kidneys were working at full capacity, and his liver was barely able to remove toxins from his body. But his vital functions remained stable. His heart beat at a steady rhythm, his brain functioned clearly, and his speech was coherent and logical. Somehow his body had learned to survive on the minimum resources that had previously been considered incompatible with life. The secret to survival turned out to be surprisingly simple. The pinches of salt that Liang added to the meltwater over the course of 5 weeks maintained the electrolyte balance in his body. Sodium prevented his cells from breaking down due to dehydration, and the constant supply of fluid kept his kidneys functioning. Basic knowledge of school chemistry saved his life. On 28 April, 2 days after his rescue, Liang celebrated his 22nd birthday in his hospital room. Nurses brought a small cake, and journalists filmed him trying to cut the sponge cake with trembling hands. Every movement was complicated. "I feel thrilled now," he told reporters. The photos show his head shaved bald. His hair had to be cut off because of parasites. His face is emaciated, but his eyes are lively and clear. On his first night in the hospital, he ate 6 bowls of liquid soup. Basnet, who stayed by his side all night, recalled, "He slept very well. He was happy, but incredibly tired." 5 days later, on 1st May, Liang was already able to walk on his own, holding onto the wall for support. Doctors called it a medical miracle, but he himself refused to accept that description. For him, it was not a victory over death, but the fulfillment of a final promise made to a dying girl. Liu Chinchun's body was evacuated by the same helicopter that brought Liang to the hospital. A mandatory autopsy was performed in Kathmandu, which confirmed the apparent cause of death: complete exhaustion of the body. Her body had simply exhausted all its resources and shut down. A week later, her remains were repatriated to Taiwan for burial. A traditional Buddhist ceremony was held in her hometown of Miaoli. It was quiet, intimate, without unnecessary publicity. Friends remembered her as a cheerful child who always dreamed of new places on the world map. Liang did not attend the funeral. He was still in the hospital under the supervision of doctors, but his thoughts were there, in Miaoli, where the girl was buried, for whose memory he refused to give up. Survivor's syndrome is a special kind of psychological trauma. Why him and not her? There are no answers to these questions, but they torment the mind for months and years to come. Dr. Pandey noted that Liang was recovering physically at an astonishing rate, but was psychologically unstable. In May 2017, Liang returned to Taiwan. Journalists met him at the airport, but he answered in monosyllables and avoided details. "I will live a normal life. I will be more careful in the future." After that, Liang Shengyue disappeared from the public eye as suddenly as he had appeared in the news. The man who had survived the medically impossible chose the most ordinary right to privacy. His case was featured in medical literature as an example of extreme survival. 47 days without food forced doctors to revise their textbooks on human physiology. The story became a warning about the importance of local guides in remote areas of the Himalayas. But the main lesson turned out to be simple. Humans are capable of enduring much more than seems possible, not because of superpowers, but because of an incredible will to live.